Poem I will be analyzing is An Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light, like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. So to begin with the TP cast, if we look at the title, it is important to put out that it is an introduction to poetry, and an introduction just covers the basic. It's not in depth. And then I find it also important to note that it says to poetry, and not, as I say here, it doesn't end in poem or something else. It says poetry, so then this kind of gives it a vast feel in that it applies to all poems, not just one. And then also it says and, not the, so then it's kind of just that this covers one specific part of it, but there are many other ways to look at poetry. And then the and also broadens it to the importance of poetry as a whole and not just one single one. To paraphrase this poem, poems are full of life and are vast and complex, but readers in society today do not take them for their true beauty, and they don't appreciate their worth. So a key poetic device to consider in this poem is personification. So throughout the whole poem, there's personification of actually a poem itself. So this says, I asked them to take a poem and hold it up to the light. And then also my favorite line is press an ear against its hive, which clearly a poem doesn't have a hive. So it's giving it this characteristic of what it's not. And almost in every stanza it does this. I drop a mouse into a poem. A poem does not have depth, but but according to the author, it does. And then also tie the poem to a chair, where a poem is just simply words on a paper, but in this case it is more than just that. That is what the author is trying to importantly convey. That a poem is more than just writing. It's not just words on a paper, it is alive. The attitude in this poem, the tone of the author, is that it's almost of disappointment, where he's telling all these amazing things about a poem and how it's vast and deep and bright and light, but then down here is how people don't look at it in that way. They torture it, they beat it, they don't look at it for its true beauty. And then also on the contrary, the speaker, like I said, almost in the beginning part, that's amazement with the vastness of poetry and all the different aspects of the beauty of it. But then it turns to, again, disappointment and amazement of people's treatment of it and how they don't appreciate its true beauty. A very important part of this poem is the shift. Right here I noted in the blue. As I mentioned a little bit with the tone, the poem begins with talking about how beautiful it is, how full of life it is, how large it is, how vast, how the surface of it is almost like an ocean. But then it turns to, so these are all talking about its beauty and its amazement, but then this turns to how people treat these poems and how, also through this shift, we're able to note that up here it's light imagery. So hold it up to the light, color slide, poem's room, surface, and then also a light switch. So this is very positive words. And then down here it turns to torture, confession, beating, rope, and also something I noticed was that the use of a rope, it didn't say any other weapon, it chose to use a rope, which is often a harsh weapon to use because it has to be, it requires a lot of force. And then also, so there's shift in tone, shift in imagery, and then also there's a shift in pronouns, where all I highlighted in the purple, it says I ask them to do this. I say drop him, but then it shifts. So this is all almost suggesting that this is how he sees poetry, but then it shifts to they, and then again here they, and how this is how other people note poetry. So it shifts from beauty of a poem to the way it is described, the beauty of the poem from the author to the way it is destroyed by other people. Now, if we go back and we revisit this title, like I mentioned earlier, I think it is important to note that it's not an introduction to a poem, but an introduction to poetry. That and that creates, as it is throughout these words in the poem, it's a very vast and broad topic, and it applies to all of the poems and even suggests to other things other than poetry. The title gives the reader an idea of the poem's content, and like I mentioned, the word poetry is used because it's not just one poem, that this applies to all. And then the theme throughout this poem, I would say, is the importance of appreciating everything's full value and not spending so much time looking into it. And I think that's kind of especially noted down here to find out what it really means, where majority of the time can waste a lot of time trying to find what is the meaning of this, what is this trying to say to us. But this author is claiming it's important to note that not every poem is going to have that, and people need to just appreciate the beauty of a poem and its incredible nature and appreciate its beauty at face value and not look too much into it. So, and also there's sort of a tone of persuasion throughout the whole piece. So my thesis. In the poem An Introduction to Poetry, the author, Billy Collins, utilizes personification to suggest the true life within a poem and the importance of appreciating its beauty. After stating the colorful nature of a poem up in this first stanza, it has this single line right here, and it says the author uses the metaphor of a poem as a hive. This word choice is very crucial because hive right here, a hive houses many organisms within it. It's not just a home or a nest. A hive has many bees or hornets or whatever may live in it. So it further emphasizes the liveliness of a poem because it's not just one single life. It's many lives. It's very alive. So then again, it connects to a poem is full of life and beauty, not just one single meaning, and it's not meant to just be butchered by people looking for what the true meaning is, what is important, what the poetic devices are, but instead that poems may just be beautiful in what they are. These are the 4 images I chose to represent this poem. First I will begin with this bottom left-hand picture. This is of a vast room, and in the poem it says walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. This is just kind of to re-emphasize how a poem is large and can hold a lot, and so I showed a big empty room because just to improve the vast size. And then also the rope right here, because in the end it says tie the poem to a chair with a rope, and like I noted earlier, a rope is a very harsh material and rough, and it's just kind of the author's choice of using this material shows the harshness of people beating the meaning out of it. And then also in the top left up here, the beehive, like I noted in my assertion or my statement, the hive is full of life, and as we can clearly see here, there are many bees, so many life, just as in a poem. And then my favorite picture is up here in the top right, and it's sort of like this is in after the shift, where people are it's almost like people are interrogating a poem, and it's kind of an abstract interpretation I took on it, where they're trying to be harsh and beat a meaning out of the poem, when in fact the poem is innocent and it may just be beautiful, or it may have meaning, but it's not intended to be overanalyzed and harsh and butchered, but instead it's just meant to be taken at its vast beauty and its face value.